this is one difference which we have noticed. Another thing is, earlier the terror attacks were one-off attacks concentrating on singular locations. You had the terrorists planting the explosive device at public places. For example, inside mass transportation systems, places of religious, political, cultural importance, shopping malls, cinema theaters, tourist centers, vital installations, places of critical infrastructure. But these are all one-off attacks. Today, it is not so. Today, these are a combination of various attacks. For example, you'll have a bomb blast in a certain location combined with a hostage situation, random and indiscriminate firing at crowded places, and the police has to deal, the security agencies have to deal with all these situations simultaneously. This is what we experienced in 26/11, and this is what you've seen the West Mall incident in Kenya. These are situations which are very likely today. Earlier, we knew, we used to anticipate, you take care of the railway stations, take care of the bus transport so that nobody plants a bomb there. Today, it is not like that. Today, this Thomas Keane Commission, which went into 9/11, they asked George Tenet, chief of CIA, was it a failure of intelligence? So George Tenet said, no, it is not a failure of intelligence, it is a failure of imagination. Now that is what is the challenge before us today. Today, we are told that we should be the foretellers of doom. Prepare for the worst. Anticipate all types of scenarios and prepare for them. You don't know where and how the terrorist mind works. And that's why I think reading Ravi Subramanian and other authors is a must for all of us, because it helps us to anticipate the various scenarios which, they want to engage eyeballs. They want to, attract the attention of the world. So, just by placing a bomb in a train or in a bus, it does not serve their purpose. They want something sensational. The more sensation it causes, the more publicity they will get. And that is where the media also provides a sort of vehicle to the terrorist to espouse their cause. So, for us, it is anticipating what is the unlikely scenario which they are planning, what is the combination of events that they could, plan out. So this for us is the biggest challenge today, and this is the basic difference between the terrorism of the 90s and the terrorism of today.
Maulvi Sahab, all these terrorist kingpins who claim to be doing this for the sake of religion, all of them are found to be bad guys. For example, right from Tiger Memon to David Headley, these were womanizers, alcohol guzzlers, and these guys never followed religion Islam as a devout Muslim. But yet they seem to be, perpetrating the terrorist acts in the name of religion. What do you think, is the purpose, and how do you think that these two things can be seen together? There is no connection with the religion, as well as at the same time they are doing these acts in the name of Islam.
See, Tiger Memon, Dawood Ibrahim, the entire 93 lot which was there. Yes, they were, they used to drink, they used to womanize, they used to gamble. David Headley is an exception in the sense that he, yes, he also womanized and he also drank. But 99% of the terror modules that we bust today are youngsters between the ages of 18, maximum 40, who are educated and totally given to the jihadi ideology. And in that, drinking, smoking, womanizing is haram. You cannot, I don't think today's terrorist is, you see, in 2008, we busted an Indian Mujahideen module which was responsible for blasts at Surat, Ahmedabad, Bengaluru, Hyderabad, Delhi, UP. They used Mumbai to send out emails to various channels half an hour before the blast, saying, here, Big Bang now, stop us if you can. And that's how we got into the act, and we arrested at that time 22 such boys. The case is under trial. The charge in our case is just being framed. Out of the 22, 13 were computer experts. One was an MBBS doctor. I think 3 or 4 were engineers. So, these are the educated people who are doing it purely because they have been indoctrinated. The ISI today is, they want to give that impression that this is homegrown terrorism, but the brains, if you take Riaz Bhatkal, you take Iqbal Bhatkal, the leaders, the heads of the Indian Mujahideen, they are based in Karachi, and they are the people who are calling the shots. Here we arrest one crop, these people take another 6 months to indoctrinate the next lot. So, it is the indoctrination from across the border which is creating this problem.
Ravi, my question to you is now, have you ever thought of a plot where this banking industry would somehow will be funding the terrorism at an international level, and these guys are now, funding so many terrorist elements to cause blasts or to cause such other terrorist acts across the world? Have you ever thought of a plot, and if not, then why?
See, wherever blasts are involved, wherever terrorists are involved, money has got to be involved. And I strongly believe that wherever money is involved, and wherever money is transferred legally or illegally, it cannot be done entirely without the bank's knowledge. There are people on the inside who are involved. There are people who know about it. There are people who are callous. There are people who let transactions go, because a lot of things today in many industries, and banking is no exception, work on this concept of Ram Bharose, wherein you assume that everything is okay till such time somebody comes up and tells you that something is wrong. Because of which, a lot of these small things tend to get, tend to slip one's mind. For example, a simple thing, a 50,000 cash deposit into an account needs a PAN number. You have tens and thousands of banking accounts across the country where you have cash deposits of 49,000 rupees 10 times a day. Nobody really cares about those. None in the banking industry really looks at it with an eagle eye or a hawk eye. But if you look at those kind of transactions, you will know that the money is actually going somewhere else. And most of it is actually used to fund these kind of operations. And that's where I think accountability, serious responsibility, wherein if somebody is found to be negligent in certain transactions which have actually caused grief, they should actually be taken to task. They should actually be treated as accomplices to the terrorist activities which happen. That accountability is not there in the entire system today. But to answer your question, it's an interesting plot. Wherever you have terrorists and banking linked, it becomes a very, very complex plot, and probably one of my future books will deal with that. And lastly, terrorism does not necessarily mean blasts, does not necessarily mean deaths of people. It could also mean corrupting ideology. For example, take the nuclear power plant in Kerala, the Kundankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu, where you have certain NGOs funding anti-nuclear power plant protests. Now that's also terrorism of some kind. And I've actually dealt in one of my previous books, which is The Bankster, on how good money actually makes its way to those guys and aids them in actually rebelling against the local government and protesting against the nuclear power plant. And that's actually what's happened in real life too, where certain NGOs have been found to do that. Yeah. So it's an interesting plot, but yeah, it's not something which has not been talked about, but in a lot more detail, yes, you can actually build many stories around those.
See, in this 2611 was funded by mere US $40,000.
Correct.
And this money was given to Headley in cash.
Correct.
Will there be a situation where a terror act has been planned? And when I say terror act, I mean, I agree that's not just blast. It may be an attempt to overhaul the government or to intimidate the authorities. Will there ever be a possibility where the cash transactions are done and still banks might be involved in some way or the other in sponsoring the terror act?
See, as organizations, bank may not be involved. Today, the days of BCCI are gone. I don't know how many of you know of this bank called BCCI in the Middle East, which was actually owned and run by a Pakistani. And it collapsed somewhere in the mid-90s. And when it collapsed, people found that it was being used as a conduit not only for terrorists to pump in bad money, but also for the CIA and other global organizations to actually fund in money and route it through to various agencies that they wanted to route the fund to. So except for those kind of transactions, I don't think the banks per se would be involved. It would largely be your officers, both at the senior and the junior level, who would know about this and act in connivance with various people for cash. But I don't think today most of the Indian or the foreign banks are at an organizational level involved in funding these kind of transactions.
Okay.
It's too much of a loss of reputation for a big brand to actually be involved in these
also because it's Hawala, so I mean they don't have to even go through the official channel, they can go through Hawala. But I just thought if, like example you give BCCI, there were so many other such banks who have funded it, have kept the money in slush funds, and from there it was routed to for terror act. But that would be a very complex plot. So coming back to you, Mr. Maurya, how do you go about investigating crime and finding out that this is your culprit? I'm referring to one particular case of Neeraj Grover, where I don't know if you guys have read that Maria Susiraj, the Kannada film actress, had gone to actually lodge a complaint. And Mr. Maurya, after a couple of meetings with her, started suspecting Maria Susiraj. So how do you suspect that this guy who has come to you as a complainant is actually the main culprit? How do you go about chasing your culprits? A. Recently, you know Afzal Usmani, who escaped from Sessions Court. And Mr. Maurya, painstakingly, his team was after this guy and they managed to arrest him within a few days. So my whole thing is, how do you get about your strategy to get these criminals? Mental as well as the real one.
See, one has put in 33 years of service now. You see, if somebody is telling a lie, your whole body you can control, except your eyes. You can't, you may change the expression on your face. You may have a deadpan face. You may, show the look of shock on your face, depending on what the situation is. But you cannot hide what you feel from your eyes. And over a period of time, one has learned, now, but it's a bit dangerous now because if a woman, she wrote this book on Maria Susaraj and Neeraj Grover. So one could look into her eyes and tell her that you are my number one suspect. But today, if you look at somebody's eyes, so I think it's, but
Sexual harassment?
No, it is, no matter what the person is trying to hide, it reflects in the eyes. That is, that is the immediate, the body language, the look in the eyes tells us that this person is trying to hide. You see, in our office, in the police office, if you sit in your office, the moment a person enters the room, he or she starts crying bitterly. The moment they leave the room, they are perfectly okay. So if you are swayed by the emotions, I don't think you will be able to detect cases. You have to be very, you have to leave your emotions, your passions aside, and then, investigate a case. And over a period of time, I think the job, so many cases one deals with, that, over a period of time, you come to know that this person is lying. Now it is a question of collecting evidence to pin him or her.
About Afzal Usmani, Marisab, how did you manage to trace this guy? Afzal Usmani, who was arrested by your guy, and this man was such a smart guy that he escaped from Sessions Court, and then you managed to track him within days.
See, no crime is perfect. Despite what the intelligent criminal thinks that he or she has committed a perfect crime, till date, there has never been a crime which is absolutely, which is foolproof and it is perfect. So it's a question of, applying logic, sitting down, not getting pressurized into, hurrying facts. When an important case takes place, there is a lot of pressure. The press puts up a pressure. 24 hours, no clue. 48 hours, no clue. 1 week, no clue. 100 days, no clue. Now, if you get pressurized, then you will commit a mistake. You will do some shortcut, and I won't name that case. We are looking into an important case at the moment. The press has crucified us, the police department, in that case, saying that, no clues, no development, no success. In the 3-4 months since this case has taken place, my boys have come and told me the case has been detected at least 4 times. On 2 occasions, there were groups of so-called accused who confessed to the crime. When they were brought before me and we questioned them further, it transpired that they had admitted, yes, we did it. And everything,